I'm so excited and have the pleasure to interview one of Australia's swimming legends, Grant Hackett. Hello, Grant.
G'day, Chris. How are you today?
Great, thank you. Grant is the CEO of Generation Life, and I've invited him here today to give us to talk to us about some of the benefits of investment bonds. But before he does that, I'd like for him to share a couple of tips on how he's been able to transition from his swimming career to his new life.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's been one of those interesting journeys. I always had a big fascination with finance. So whilst I was in the middle of my swimming career, I was studying commerce law at university. After my swimming career, I went and did my MBA. I first started out in banking and finance with Westpac and BT, and then eventually moved into this business. And one of the things that I actually found was a lot of the characteristics or behaviours and principles of success are exactly the same as what they were in the pool as they are in business. Just the discipline, the teamwork, the commitment, clarity on goals, and just being really focused on how you're going to execute all of that day in, day out. It's a thing that we actually call our operating rhythm here. And I think a lot of those high performance principles I was able to bring from the pool into business, and I think that's put me in pretty good stead. And like anybody, you've got to learn the skills, and you've got to be able to, ascertain what product you're selling, how you're selling it within your industry, and what the clear value proposition is. And certainly been able to do that fairly well here at Generation Life.
Tell us more specifically about the benefits of investment bonds.
Yeah, well, I really like this particular product, or it's not even a product, I call it a tax structure. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because it does offer something outside of superannuation or complementary to superannuation. And when those changes came in on the 1st of July 2017, that was the key reason that I actually got into this particular space. And I followed my leader, who was the CEO of BT at the time, over to this business, a gentleman by the name of Rob Coombe. And since then, we've really been able to grow our market share and significantly grow this space. I'd love to take you through a few of the key features of the bonds. So a few of the key features that people don't really have an education or a knowledge around bonds that are fairly interesting is the fact that regardless of what your marginal tax rate, if you're to invest through this structure, you'll have a maximum tax rate of 30%. Now, if you get your add backs like your franking credits, with us, we manage a mandate, so there's a capital management side. Some of those tax rates can actually be close to superannuation, so they can fit anywhere from 15 up to around 24% for a lot of your equity portfolios with Generation Life. So there's an automatic tax arbitrage if you're on a higher tax rate than that. So this is a great investment option or investment structure to go through. The second point here, there's no distributions. So that means bonds don't distribute capital gains or income. However, you can receive a distribution at any point in time if you choose to. So it's not like it's restricted, it's just that they don't do it naturally. And what I mean by that is they're fantastic inside trust structures, because if you don't want to distribute the income from a trust, which you always do because it'll naturally pay the highest marginal tax rate, you can keep it inside the trust and get that compounding effect at a much lower tax rate. The third point over here is the fact that they're tax paid after 10 years. So any distributions that you receive, either partial or full, are tax paid, so therefore you have nothing to declare on your tax return. So, and inside 10 years, there's a lot of tax advantages as well. So if you take a partial redemption inside 10 years, against any of the income, you always receive a full 30% offset. So even if you've been paying a lower tax rate of say 17 or 18% inside the bond, you still receive a full 30% offset. So again, you've got another tax arbitrage inside 10 years there. You can put in 125% of what you put in on the previous year's contribution, so that can pile up to a pretty large amount over time if you continue to do that. Tax-free transfers. Now, if you think of another asset, like you bought an investment property for $500,000, it's $1 million, you sell it, you're going to trigger a CGT liability in there, and then the next person who receives that asset is of course going to be paying stamp duty. Now that doesn't happen when you transfer a bond. You can transfer it to any other party and there's no tax liabilities that are incurred. So it's a very flexible type of investment to have. So there's a lot of flexibility. We say it's the most tax effective structure outside of super, but it's the most flexible structure, full stop. The 6th point that we got here at Generation Life, we've got 49 investment options which cover all the asset classes that you would like to invest in, and you can transfer around that investment menu as much as you want and you won't trigger a CGT liability. So if you think markets might be changing, good or bad, and you want to change the investment strategy, you can do that and not incur a tax liability. Unlike if you were directly invested into an asset and you wanted to change into another one because you thought perhaps that's a little bit high risk now, I've got a lot of growth out of that, of course you're going to be paying the tax liability at that point in time. That doesn't happen inside our investment menu. The last few points just on the bottom here, no tax file number required. So great for clients that are overseas that want to hold assets here because we're the tax paying entity, not the individual. Also for clients perhaps going overseas for a period but don't want to have any compliance or reporting or reporting costs. They can certainly set up a bond and it's very much set and forget and there's no withholding tax if you're living overseas. The second last point here, creditor protection. If you like to fall asleep, you can read the Bankruptcy Act. It's under Section 1162D of the Bankruptcy Act, and bonds are creditor protected. So they're not just great from a tax point of view, but they're great from a protection point of view as well. So, and particularly in a time of so much uncertainty that we find ourselves now, that's a great feature to have. And the final one today, which I'm going to talk about just over the next couple of slides, is that it can be structured as a non-estate asset. So if you're in a situation where you might have a high conflict family or you want to carve something outside of your will and know it's going to go 100% to that beneficiary because we have binding nominations, you're guaranteed of that, so you get full reassurance around that intergenerational wealth transfer. So I want to go into that a little bit more now with you, Chris, and just talk about the 5 core uses that we're seeing with investment bonds at the moment. And this has sort of escalated over the last 3 years, specifically around those changes to superannuation. So the first point where we see a lot of our inflows come from, and we did well over 300 million in inflows just for the previous financial year, was an alternative to superannuation. So a lot of people capped out in super, preservation age pushing out, or just want something complementary to super that's got full liquidity. They can do that with an investment bond, so tax effectively. Estate planning. This has been a massive one, particularly since the whole COVID-19 situation has come upon us all. It's been thrusted upon us all. Estate planning has really become one of those issues that's more front and center than what it ever was before. So we're getting a lot of inquiries, a lot of strategies around that, and supporting a lot of financial advisors and clients around that one in particular. Trusts, I already spoke about the issue there. A lot of people house their assets inside a trust. They have to distribute that income every single year. A lot of the time it goes out to a bucket company, which is a tax deferral strategy. Bond inside a trust, that doesn't happen. It absorbs the income and therefore you can get that compounding effect and you don't have to distribute out to the bucket company and then have a tax bill eventually. Saving for a child, so it's a great tax effective savings plan for a future cost of a child. So whether you're talking private school fees, a home deposit, particularly if you're living in Sydney or Melbourne, a home deposit takes a long time to save for, or any other item that you might think of, like a new car or a wedding or something like that. It's a tax effective way to save. Grandparents absolutely love this particular structure because it allows them to bypass a generation, but also leave something for them and for a specific purpose where they can support their children's children. And the final point here, which is a small part of our inflows, but nonetheless still quite important, is around government entitlements. So if you're on a certain threshold around the income test, it will come off the income test. So therefore you'll receive government entitlements such as aged care packages, Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card, etc. So it certainly helps with some of the deeming. The final point that I want to just touch on today in these last 2 slides is around estate planning, which I said has got a lot of inquiries at the moment, given the type of environment that we're in. I think everyone's kind of considering their own mortality. So firstly, we always like to talk about wills and testamentary trusts. They can often be challenged, and the more money you have in there, the more likeliness that a family member is going to challenge the will. Costly to set up, particularly when you talk about testamentary trusts and having complex family structures and entity structures. They're very complex, not just to set up and costly to set up. They're also very costly to run over the years as well. So there's those sorts of things that people incur. Probate can take over 12 months. You've got to have willing participants around, executors of a will, trustees to run the trust. They're also subject to litigation, and the problem with litigation is the fact the estate pays. So people are often more motivated to go into litigation in this particular scenario because they're not putting their hand in their own pocket, they're going to someone else's and they can fight and fund that thing for as long as they can until that money runs out and it's fully exhausted. So that's the common pitfalls. Some of the situations that you might find yourself in and some of the desires that people are probably willing to hopefully bypass if they can is just conflict and imbalances between grandchildren and children. Particularly if you're in a situation where you might have 3 children, they might be married, but 2 of them might only have kids. So you want to leave a little bit more on that side versus this side. So a bond is a great way to be able to navigate you around that, and also not to see the family unit fracture because they feel like they didn't get their fair entitlements through the will and the estate being passed on. Turbulent relationships, worried about your children's relationships, so you don't necessarily want to pass that money on straight away. We have a thing called a future event facility. So if you're worried about that money being transferred because someone's too young, not good with money, a turbulent relationship, you can withhold that for as long as you want to and distribute that capital over time if you wish to as well. So that's a great feature and exclusive to Generation Life. Children with disabilities, we've dealt with all these situations before where we're just setting up bonds inside a trust to make sure that that's managed for children who are in unfortunate situations for the rest of their life and they can be looked after properly. Children under bankruptcy, so if someone's got a business that might be going too well and you're a little bit worried that might go under and that money's got to go to creditors, that's passed on through the estate. You can, obviously, one, it's protected, a bond is protected, Section 1162D, as I said, of the Bankruptcy Act, but also on the other side of that, you can delay when those funds are received too, and they aren't the beneficial owner until they actually receive that on a certain date that's been set. And also blended families. Would you believe in Australia we actually have the second highest per capita of blended families in the world? So, just complex family structures. Yeah, no, so it's a phenomenal stat. So I think all those things considered, estate planning can be very complex, very challenging, and can have a myriad of future problems. But a bond is a great way to avoid all that because it can be carved out of the estate and 100% binding nominations and all the other features that I spoke about earlier that you can have around it. And just finally, just to touch on some of those features, again, it's a non-estate asset, so it doesn't form part of your estate. It can go into your estate if that's what you wish to do, but it doesn't have to. Tax-free proceeds, so it doesn't matter whether you're a dependent or a non-dependent. And it doesn't matter about that 10-year rule or any other rules. Upon death, a bond is completely tax-free. So it's another feature that people wouldn't even appreciate. Automatic transfer at specific ages. So if you want to leave something to your grandchildren and they might be aged 11 and you think, God, I don't want an 11-year-old receiving $200,000, you can have that transfer age at age 20 or 25 or 30 when they're more suited to receive a lump sum of cash. No CGT, so no annual tax or CGT reporting. So it's a very cost-effective way to actually run a product because you don't have all the reporting because we're the tax-paying entity. We do all the heavy lifting for you there. And the final point that we've got on here, which is the biggest one around estate planning. I know if I was a grandparent, which I'm unfortunately not yet, I'm just a dad. You are, so you would probably appreciate this then. You want to pass on your money and you don't want to see your kids fight over it. You don't want to see your grandchildren involved with that. You don't want to see the family fractured. And a bond is a great way to stop that up front and to be proactive in your planning. So some really great strategies with the investment bond. It's part of the reason I'm just so passionate about this particular product or structure.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for giving us an insight of investment bonds. For those of you out there that would like to know more, feel free to reach out for more information. Thank you.